This episode of Around the Oval is brought to you by Todd Pennington with Revolution Mortgage. Hey, Ohio State fans, Alex Gleitman here of BuckeyeScoop.com, back with another episode of Around the Oval, brought to you by Todd Pennington with Revolution Mortgage. This week's guest is Brett Ciancia from Pick Six Previews. Brett is one of the best out there in putting together preseason material, previewing the upcoming college football season. A lot of you may have grown up with Athlon Sports or Phil Steele, but Brett is the guy right now, extremely accurate in his predictions since he started Pick Six back in 2012. Normally I know you guys have someone on video on these calls, but due to the tropical storm, Brett's having some Wi-Fi issues and things like that. He wasn't able to get on video, but he was able to join us via the phone. So we're happy to have him. Brett, thanks for joining the show. How are you doing?
Yeah, Alex, thanks for having me, and thanks for that praise. I'm excited to be on another Buckeye Scoop show, another Ohio State show. I hunkered down from December till June writing this thing and researching it, and then right when it goes on sale, it turns into talking season. So 70 shows so far the last 4 weeks, all across the country. I'm loving it, loving every second, and excited to be talking college football here.
Yeah, that's awesome, man. So, I've been covering Ohio State since 2008, and that's a job in itself. But you immerse yourself in not only just one team, but 128, 130 FBS, probably some FCS teams as well. Tell us a little bit. I mean, how you got started doing this stuff and where it's at today.
Yeah, so, college football has always been a passion of mine. But growing up in the suburbs of Philly, it's definitely a professional sports town. It's all about the Eagles, who I do love the Eagles, but it's definitely a pro town. But me and my dad were college football people from day one. So I'm one of those that locks in every Saturday with, 4 screens, watching game day all the way till 2 a.m. when the Pac-12 finishing up. So I love digging into all these teams, but really I started to notice that a lot of the national guys stay a little bit too vague. They would only cover the Clemsons, the Alabamas of the world, and just use one-liners with real note without research. So, and for those magazines you mentioned, a lot of them do great work, a lot of respect for what they do, but even at times with print constraints, I think they could have dove in deeper into the details. So that's what kind of drove me into building this out. It's all 65 Power 5 teams, plus Notre Dame and BYU. And really at the heart of it, I'm really a numbers and data guy first and a football guy second. So on each page, I have my advanced graphics, advanced stats, the analytics in a very visual format, but then also being able to put it back into readable terms because it's boring to read that, Ohio State's 0.125 X and Y metric, or whatever what acronym you want to call it. But I put it back into readable terms. I'm calling head coaches, calling coordinators, tuning into local shows like this one all across the country. So, it's very detail heavy. And the last bit real quick is after last year's book went out, the 2019 edition, I was selected to become a Heisman voter. So major credential there, the ultimate honor. And here we are in 2020.
That's awesome, man. Congrats. And I'm assuming we can probably count on you to put a vote in for Justin Fields this year then?
Yeah, well, I'll say he's definitely the prohibitive favorite right now as we talk here in August. Looking at the only returning candidate that was in New York last year, and he deserved that seat. We're talking about 51 touchdowns and just 3 picks. Was very calm with the ball, very, very efficient, dual threat. He's got the whole package. He's got a perfect team around him. We'll get into that too, but certainly the favorite heading into 2020.
No doubt. Just busting your chops a little there. But speaking of 2020, when you, as you mentioned, you started to put this thing together, I guess, December, like right after the season ended, or regular season, I should say, probably. And nobody could have predicted what this year would have looked like then. COVID and, a lot of other stuff going on in this country. And it's interesting. We're less than a month away from Ohio State's potential opener against Illinois on September 3rd, yet we don't know for sure if there is going to be a season. I mean, it looks like it's heading that way. It looks like there's at least toward one starting. but it's not certain. Nothing's certain right now. And we don't know, even if there is a season that starts, will we be able to finish it? What are your thoughts on football being played this season, and how do the recent changes in going conference only and all the new schedules, how does that impact, the work that you've put together so far?
Yeah, it's been an unprecedented off season. I'm sure everyone's tired of hearing that word, but it's true. So like I said, I hunkered down from December till June, really. Started to hear news about this breakout, obviously in March, April. Hadn't really even considered the impact of the fall yet, but then once you start creeping into May, it really started to impact everything. So what goes into my book is a ton of film study. I love digging into the film. Spring games, I try and watch anything I can get my hands on. Calling coaches, calling coordinators, like I said, my advanced numbers. But one of those key factors in there, the spring game. Now, I'm not there to watch whether Scarlet beats Gray per se, but I want to see these rising new starters, the early enrollee freshmen, new coordinators, new schemes, that kind of thing. So it's a very valuable tool to be able to use. Now, without that, it kind of shifted my prediction logic a bit because I had to rely more on returning starters, coach continuity, scheme continuity, programs that are keeping it in line with last year for the most part because, no spring ball, no summer camp, and a really limited fall camp, what we're seeing now. So anyone that's been trying to find a new quarterback, aka Michigan, or implementing new offenses, Penn State's going through a change. That's really tough, not having those 5 or 6 months of preseason prep to iron out some of those details. So relying heavily on returning production, returning starters, that kind of thing. Now, heading into 2020 this fall, to take it back a step, college football is as American as it gets. This is it's been tied to really every major event. It's just kind of what am I trying to say? It's trying to just sewn into the fabric of Americana for the last 150 years. You go back, football survived World War II, or World War I, World War II, the Great Depression, even the 1918 pandemic, all the way up through, the Civil Rights Movement. And obviously there were some ups and downs with that involved with college football, but overall the positives shine through in the end. And so it's really helped the country through times of change, through times of stress, through crises. So if it's safe and feasible, I really, really hope that we get a season or at least some games in. It just means so much to the country. Obviously the student athletes to put in the insane amount of work, the coaches too, but not just them, but all the alumni love it, but really the local businesses too that are going to be crushed by this. And some of these campus towns, you go to these games, the local economy really depends on these 7 fall Saturdays. So many people at stake here. I really hope we find a way. I think the country needs it.
Yeah, absolutely. I think everyone's with you there. That's listening. Everyone wants football, college, pro. It would be great and kind of a nice welcome distraction as long as obviously the safety of those involved can be secured as best as possible. Speaking of some of the changes that need to be made, we mentioned the Big Ten as well as some other conferences most other conferences, I guess at this point, went to mostly a conference-only play. The Big Ten is strictly conference-only. There won't be any out-of-conference games. They announced their schedule last week, and it's a 10-game schedule starting the weekend of September 5th. As we mentioned, Ohio State will open up on the road against Illinois on September 3rd. I guess without going into specifics, what are your thoughts on the Big Ten strategy? 10-game conference or 10-game schedule, only in conference, starting still the same date, September 5th, as it was originally supposed to be planned, versus like the SEC who bumped it back a little bit, leaving, I think it's, each team has 3 bye weeks, including everyone having one right before the Big Ten championship game, stressing flexibility there to be able to move games and schedule some things around potential outbreaks and things of that nature. And then, have the Big Ten championship scheduled for December 5th, but again, still the flexibility to move that back to the 12th or the 19th, where the SEC is going to have it before the college football playoff makes their final vote. What is your thoughts on both the strategy of the Big Ten as well as, anything you saw stand out within the Big Ten scheduling, whether it's a specific team having a really hard schedule or really easy schedule, or just, general thoughts on the process or what they set up in general?
Yeah, for sure. There's a lot there. I'll start with, Power 5 football in general. I thought this was an opportunity where the 5 conferences were going to come together. We've always been talking about it, if the Power 5 leagues join together, could they be their own entity, really? I thought this would be a moment where they could really get on the same page. Instead, the Big Ten moved first, and, I didn't have all the answers. At the time, I was questioning why they would move so quickly and alone. But as it turns out, I'm not just saying this being on an Ohio State show, I like the Big Ten strategy better than the other 4 leagues. Because when you go conference only and you limit the games down to 10, the reasons you do that are to be able to have more control, more flexibility, more bye weeks, just in case there are outbreaks, like you said. So it makes sense what the Big Ten did. The SEC, now they kept it, conference only, kept it 10 games, but they take out a lot of those buffer weeks by pushing the season back to late September. So they're keeping the same amount of games, 10, but instead of having 3 bye weeks and some flexibility throughout the year, they're just going straight in. I mean, they're not saving any buffer weeks. They're using them up in the first 3 weeks, before the first kickoff for them. So I like the Big Ten strategy there. If you want to compare it to one of the professional leagues going, obviously the college football is not in the bubble, so it's not going to be as seamless as you've seen in the NBA and the NHL. But what you saw with the MLB, where they are traveling a bit, there is some, contact with others outside their team. You saw an outbreak down in Miami, the Miami Marlins with the Phillies, and that ended up canceling, I think, the weekend of games and maybe a week or 2 for the quarantine team. So that's an example of if something pops up, the Big Ten did it right, that they had these 3 or 4 or even 5 bye weeks built in. The SEC, by delaying their kickoff date, those 3 or 4 weeks, now doesn't have that. So in that sense, I like what the Big Ten did. We can talk about their timing of the game, though, which I don't really agree with next. What were your thoughts, initial reactions about that?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. I would have kept it as the last game on the schedule. I think the only rational explanation is they wanted it to be played. They wanted it early enough in the season where there was flexibility that if it did need to be moved back, it could be moved back. But they also wanted enough games under each team's belt so that it wasn't, that the teams were seasoned, and they felt that they would at least be like Michigan breaking in a new quarterback in game 1 if they play that game week 1 to make sure that it's played. I don't know if that's really completely fair to Michigan, but with 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 games under their belt, including a bye week before they have to come to Columbus and play Ohio State, there's no excuses there. And so I think that's similar timing than to when Florida and Georgia generally play their rivalry game every year. Probably similar with Texas and Oklahoma as well. And so while as a traditionalist, in a lot of ways, I'm not thrilled with the timing of that game, I think it does make sense logically when you think about it like that. But what are your thoughts?
Yeah, well, I think, obviously in a best case scenario, you have it as the season finale like usual. I think the main concern for all the student athletes in those locker rooms, they want to have that game played. Even if it ends up being the only game they play, I think that if you asked all of them, they would want the Ohio State-Michigan game. So to me, my next question is, what's the most likely game to survive out of this whole – we have no idea if it's going to be shut down after the second week. So I would have actually guessed it would have been the season opener. They would have used that Thursday night, September 3rd night, and make it Ohio State-Michigan, the kickoff to this unprecedented 2020 season. You would have had to deal with the new quarterback for Michigan, 4 new offensive linemen for Michigan, but hey, that's college football. Ohio State's, replacing Chase Young and, replacing most of the receiver core. What else? Safety and a couple corners.
J.K. Dobbins.
Yeah, Dobbins. Now, I will say, right when you think you find a roster hole with Ohio State, they pull in a 5-star transfer, a 2,000-yard back from Oklahoma. Nobody else gets those kind of gifts. But no, so I think that's part of college football, they're replacing and reloading. But anyway, I thought that would have been the safest option. If you had to guarantee that game be played, you either put it right at the beginning or super late December. So I now, after you explain it a bit, I kind of see why you want to have a couple buffer weeks there before and after. But it just didn't make sense at first glance to place it right smack in the middle with no bye weeks surrounding it. But I think they'll do what they can, even if they have to extend it down to late December and play it. That's my hope, because that's so important to college football. And I know all the student athletes would agree.
Yeah, for sure. That's interesting. But that's just one game on Ohio State's schedule. I wanted to talk to you while we have you a little bit about their schedule and your thoughts on it. I mean, just running through it, it's at Illinois, home against Rutgers, at Purdue, home against Indiana, bye week, home against Nebraska, at Michigan State, home against Michigan, at Maryland, at Penn State, bye week, home against Iowa, bye week, and then they're obviously hoping Big Ten championship in Indianapolis. Tom Moore, who I know you spent on the Morning Scoop a couple weeks back, and I last week were talking about, trying to find a game that was a trap game, something Ohio State might overlook. It's hard, I think, with this schedule. I mean, obviously, you always circle the Michigan game. I think, especially in recent years, you always circle that Penn State game. It's going to be on the road. Obviously, no fans is a huge advantage for Ohio State. That would have been a night whiteout game, as it usually is. But those are the two games that, you circle right off the bat. I think you get Iowa at home, Purdue on the road, especially now without Rondale Moore, and knowing that Ohio State will have that revenge factor from the last time they went to West Lafayette. I'm not really too concerned about that game. Michigan State's not supposed to be good. Maryland's not supposed to be good. Nebraska shouldn't be very good. I think Indiana's going to be actually pretty solid. And I could see Ohio State with a bye week following after three, what I consider what will be easy wins. Maybe overlooking that a little bit, but it's at home. They're the more talented team. I think they'll win that game. Looking at the schedule, is there any game that you see that Ohio State can maybe overlook or that could sneak up on them, maybe like Purdue or Iowa did a few years back?
Yeah, well, right when you started the question there, when I heard the phrase trap game, I right away looked and saw what kind of Big Ten West opponents you guys were playing, because, it's been Purdue, it's been Iowa, not just the last two games against them, but really with Purdue, over the last, I'd say 20 years, they've kind of had Ohio State's, I don't want to say had their number, because I'm sure it's still slanted Ohio State's way, but Purdue, more often than not, has been kind of a thorn in Ohio State's sides, especially out there in West Lafayette.
They played them tough for
when
sure.
They have those, especially when they have those makeshift lights turned on and the place gets rocking. So that would have been a scary game for me if it was, a packed Ross-Ade Stadium, if they had Rondale Moore, if this was all normal. So without those factors, I think they destroyed Purdue this year, making up for, like you said, avenging that loss. Indiana came to mind as kind of the trap game, because they're not a rival per se, so you don't really have that rival energy. They might not be ranked yet at that point. It's going to be a quiet. I know it's at home, but it'll still be a quiet environment. I don't really know how these games are going to feel if without crowds, if you're going to be able to catch teams sleeping a bit. I would say Indiana is that trap potential. Michigan State and Maryland are both terrible. I'm not even going to try and mince words about it. They're both train wrecks this year surrounding the Michigan game, because I agree with you. You'd look right before and after the Michigan or before and after the Penn State games as potential sleepers. Nothing there. So I think it's manageable. And one last note would be, it's an even year. That means it's a whiteout game at Penn State. Now, with that said, given the circumstances, it'll be more of a gray out. It'll be just the bleachers. So that I think it's probably the biggest home field advantage in college sports. You always say the home team gets 3 points. I think with Penn State in a night game whiteout, you could even argue 5.5, even 6 points of an advantage. So throw that out the window, and this looks like a very manageable slate for Ohio State.
Yeah, I definitely agree. Before we jump into thoughts on Ohio State as a team, wanted to bring up Michigan. Just wanted to get your general thoughts on them. Obviously, it's something Ohio State fans keep their eye on every single year. It's going to be interesting to me. I think they actually dodged a bullet. I don't know. They might have beaten Washington on the road, but they definitely dodged a bullet having to go there so early in the season. Looking at their schedule, I mean, having to go to Minnesota, playing Penn State, even though that's at home, obviously having to go to Columbus, they get Wisconsin at home. And I could see maybe even Northwestern last week of the year being a little tricky for them. I mean, That's right there. It's 1, 2, 3, at least 4 certainly tough games. Going to Indiana as well, and then going to Northwestern. Maybe 5, 6 what I would call games that I'm not guaranteeing a win for Michigan in. How do you see the Wolverines faring this coming season? What are your thoughts on their team overall?
Michigan dodged the bullet without the Washington game, considering how strong that defense is. With Michigan, they're replacing 4 NFL draft pick offensive linemen. And normally when you'd hear that, you'd think, okay, with 4 NFL linemen, they really, opened up some running lanes and protected the quarterback, but that's not the case. They're actually below average in yards per carry last year, not much of a run push, and only about average in sack protection. So, from that point, you take away 4 NFL caliber bodies. How is this young offensive line going to try and improve off those numbers? That's going to be a major obstacle. The other's a quarterback where, some Michigan fans love him or hate him with Shea Patterson. It's still a multi-year starting quarterback gone. Now without a spring ball, without summer, and a very small 4-week or even 3-week, in this case, fall camp, Harbaugh and staff are going to have to find a new starting quarterback. Now, that's the other thing. The story within the story for Michigan this year is their quarterback issue because Harbaugh came in as the quarterback whisperer. Obviously, what he did with Andrew Luck at Stanford, taking a 2-star kid, turning him into the number 1 overall pick. He's got to hit on one of these 2 guys. I know the Ohio State monkey on the back is one thing, but he's got to be able to develop one of these 2 quarterbacks with Milton and McCaffrey. They're both 6'5" prospects, both top 200 recruits, handpicked by Harbaugh. So he's got to produce an all Big Ten quarterback out of this bunch and get some, get an improving offense going.
Yeah. I don't want to stick on Michigan too long. I ask one more question because I always get into arguments with my friends who are Michigan fans about this. I think Jim Harbaugh, I understand he's done – if you look at an average college football team, he's done well. He wins, 9, 10 games a year. His teams are at least in contention for the division, and they're usually playing that Ohio State game for something, it seems. But he hasn't been able to get the job done. If you told a Michigan fan, what was his first year? It was 2015. Right? Or yes, it was 2015,
Yeah.
I believe. So he's been there now 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 5 years. If you told them in 5 years he would be 0-5 against Ohio State, wouldn't win a conference title, wouldn't even win a division title, and I mean, obviously not make the college football playoff with all that happening, they would have been extremely disappointed. And now it's almost like, this is who we are. We're not a top 5 program. We're maybe a top 10 program. We're a top 15 program. We're a 10-win team. Maybe we'll get lucky one year and beat Ohio State and be able to, go to the Big Ten title. But this is just who we are. And I don't think, if I was a Michigan fan, that's not acceptable to me. And I don't think that the job he's done is acceptable. I think he should be on the hot seat. His career producing is not much better than Brady Hoke's. And they got rid of Brady Hoke pretty quickly. So I would love your thoughts on, non-biased opinion, because I look at it pretty objectively. I feel like the facts don't lie. What is your opinion on Jim Harbaugh? I mean, I know he's a Michigan man. I know he was a great player there. I know he's got a great track record at Stanford and with the 49ers. And I'm honestly surprised he hasn't done better at Michigan, but he hasn't. What are your thoughts on his status as the head coach of Michigan?
Yeah, so I think that if he were to be replacing Schembechler right off the cuff, or maybe even replacing Lloyd Carr, I think that this sample size wouldn't look as impressive. It would look like a decline from the days of old. But you got to put into context what he inherited. I mean, the Rich Rod years were a disaster. The Brady Hoke years, I mean, yeah, there was the one Sugar Bowl run, but really inconsistent play, up and down, and a lot of losses. So I think he's really improved the program from that point. And it's not his fault that he's placed in the same division as one of the dynasties of college football. I mean, the Urban Meyer dynasty will go down as one of the best. What was it? 8 seasons, eight season runs. So it's very tough. Yeah, all those stats you mentioned about no divisions, no conferences. Yeah, that's all brutal. But part of the job as a head coach is your coordinator hires. And his hire on defense of Don Brown, I mean, they are legitimately one of the best defenses every year. year in and year out.
For 11 games, right?
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. That's part of it. But I really think that, now I'm not going to speak for Michigan fans. I'm not a Michigan man, but I think that given the inconsistencies that they had the decade prior, I think they're okay with a lot of top 10 recruiting classes. The recruiting profile is definitely elevated. Consistently 10 wins. Again, it's not elite, but from what they're coming from, it looks like positive. So, yeah, you got to beat Ohio State. I understand it's a dynasty. You got to get that monkey off the back. And, again, you got to produce a quarterback. But the recruiting, he's done well with. The defensive coordinator hire and the defense has been excellent. And they're in title races all the way till November. It's just, you're playing against a dynasty. So there's a gray area to me with Jim Harbaugh. I think this year's a big prove-it year for me, specifically a quarterback. He's got to, like I said, you keep saying it, but he's got to produce an all-league quarterback out of this bunch. If not, then I start to wonder the trajectory of the offense. If I could use one example here, it might be a stretch, but you were talking about a guy who's 5 years in, hasn't won anything of championship value, but it's still been an above average or even, top 10, top 15 program. It reminds me of Tom Osborne back in the 70s when he took over after a two-time defending, national champion Bob Devaney in 1970. Osborne takes over, I think, in 72 or 73. It takes him almost 10, 12 years to finally knock off Oklahoma, their diehard rival, their bitter rival there. So he was a guy that was winning 9 games a year, but just couldn't win that 10th against Oklahoma, and it blocked them from Big 8 titles and from, national titles. So, it's definitely a stretch. They're definitely different personalities. But I think that, being stuck with your rival as a dynasty at the moment is pretty tough to really compare them. I see the same thing from Auburn fans when they're getting on Gus Malzahn, putting him on the hot seat. And it's like, what do you expect? You're stuck in the same state as Nick Saban at the peak of his dynasty. And even Auburn's won 3 times against Nick Saban. The rest of the SEC the last 5 or 6 years is 3 combined. It's like 3-55. Gus is 3-3. So,
and it's probably LSU,
it's all about.
It's probably LSU. Those other 3 too, right?
Yeah, right. So it's all about perspective. I don't know. And I dig into a lot of that in the book too, because I like digging into program context, like where this program was before Harbaugh. I have a lot of 10-year trends, so you can see there's a clear, uptick once he took over. My game grader formula agrees. A lot of these Brady Hoke teams were bottom of the barrel. I mean, a couple in the 48th overall I see his final year. The years before that were outside the top 25. So, yeah, Harbaugh was an inch short against JT Barrett and, a field goal short against Iowa the 1 year. So, I don't know. They're a pretty solid program. I know I'm going to lose some followers on this show, but, I think it's more a credit to Ohio State and the way they've built a dynasty that, you have above average top 10 teams and it's still not enough.
Yeah, no,
Michigan.
I think people appreciate you keeping it real. And I honestly think that 2016 game was a program trajectory changer. If Michigan wins that game and JT Barrett's ruled short or he doesn't get it or whatever, whichever side of the field you're on, coin you're on, if he doesn't get it and Michigan wins that game, I think it's very different right now. I don't think that they would continue to have as many struggles as they have over the last 3 years against Ohio State, but we'll never know. Obviously, he was ruled first down. Curtis Samuel on the very next play takes it into the end zone, and Ohio State has pretty much beat the brakes off him the last 3 years, certainly the last 2 years. But speaking of Ohio State, this year, before all the craziness, after that Clemson game, I said, and talking to some people in the Woody Hayes Athletic Center that I know were steaming after that game, they knew that they had Clemson and they blew it. They didn't convert good drives in the beginning of the game to touchdowns. They were held to field goals. They made some big mistakes on their end. Obviously some questionable calls by the referees, but I think, that they felt that they beat themselves more than Clemson beat them. And I think they were really motivated coming into this offseason. And I think that I normally don't say this. You could go back and look at my predictions. I came into this year saying Ohio State's going to win the national title. this coming season, and they still can. Obviously, things have changed a little bit. Circumstances have changed, but I think this team is super close. They're super motivated still. They got the star power. There's certainly some voids to fill. What are your thoughts on Ohio State this year? Where do you think their strengths are, and where do you think the areas that you need to see them kind of reload or show something to be able to prove that they're a national contender are?
Yeah, so if it's any consolation to Buckeye fans, I think Ohio State was the best team in the country last year. My numbers agree. They finished first in my game grader formula. That's not just in the Big Ten, that's nationally. And what that does, it looks at scoring differential, yardage differential, explosive plays, efficiency numbers, per play, everything. And it's opponent adjusted too. So, one quick note on that. Ohio State, they opened up the season with 10 straight games won by 24-plus points. The first team to do it since 1971, Nebraska. I mean, they were destroying everything in their path, except for the first half against Wisconsin in the Big Ten title game. It was almost a perfect season. It was. Now, with the Clemson game, I don't think the better team won that game. Now, I get that there are 50-50 calls to be made in college football and in football and in sports, and you see them tend to even out. I don't remember many games that have gone 5-0 the other way on 50-50 calls, and they weren't just, a holding here and there. These were touchdowns off the board. These were turnovers, ejections of players. So, yeah, I walked away from that game thinking that the better team lost. Now, you fast forward to 2020, it's still a very complete team. Under Urban Meyer and now continue with Ryan Day, they're stacking elite top 3 recruiting classes. So for any of these early NFL guys that left, just keep in mind you're replacing it with the best talent in the country as usual. Now, actually, coming into 2019, if you remember, most of the national publications had Michigan winning the Big Ten. I was one of only 3 out of 20 to have Ohio State to go to the playoff last year. So, and Ohio State proved me right. I love their call on defense, switching up the coordinator, because when you watch them in 18, everyone says they were slow, the defense. I mean, maybe that was part of it, but I think they were really just hesitating a bit, a step here and there, overthinking the complex playbook. So what I loved about the Madison and Hafley hire, the combo hire there, was they were saying, hey, give me that fat playbook. We're throwing that out the window. Let our athletes play fast, play quick, not hesitating, flying around on the ball. And you saw that all season. So genius coordinator move there. We saw it happen. And Justin Fields, was another unknown to a lot of publications, but I had faith in him and Ryan Day as a play caller. It all came true. So, so for 2020, what I love is the offensive line could be the best in the country. I know they were a Joe Moore Award finalist last year, but, all of it's back. Josh Myers at center's an All-American. Wyatt Davis, All-American caliber. Thayer Munford, Fields we touched on, and touched on the running back spot, which I thought would be a hole for once. Might have finally caught Ohio State with a hole. Entered Trey Sermon, a 2,000-yard back from Oklahoma. So, even at receiver, you might say, oh, they're kind of young. They're replacing some starters. How about 8 top 100 receivers coming in to fill the voids? So I think there's an embarrassment of riches there. Offense shouldn't miss a beat. And defensively, so you lose Chase Young. A guy that reminds you of him a bit is Zach Harrison. He's the next star there at defensive end. Had a very similar freshman stat line to what Young put up as a freshman. Linebacker core, very veteran, and some star power in the secondary too, with Shaun Wade. So complete roster. They're motivated. They're maybe pissed off from last year. They're my pick to win the Big Ten and make the playoff again.
That's I think you just redeemed yourself from your Michigan praise. So Ohio State fans will love to hear that. Last question, and we'll let you go. You said Ohio State's one of your playoff teams. I know in your publication you list your 4 playoff teams, but I'm going to take it a step further. Give us your 4 playoff teams. Give us your 2 teams that you think will – we're not going to hold you to this, but 2 teams that you think will play for the national title and the team that you think is going to win it. And obviously this is not knowing anyone's going to be affected by COVID or anything going on like that, but give it to us how you see it right now.
Yeah, so when I published the book in mid-June, it was Clemson, Ohio State, Florida, and Oregon. Florida coming out of the SEC because they had a nice schedule boost. They avoided Alabama in the crossover. Georgia draws them. And also I liked that they had the staff continuity and the quarterback continuity in this weird offseason. Meanwhile, Georgia's replacing Jake Fromm. Bama's replacing Tua. They're both replacing a ton of linemen. Bama went through a defensive decline last year. So a lot of factors had me with Florida. Oregon, I love them out of the Pac-12. This was even factoring in a loss to Ohio State. I thought, all right, even if they lose that September game to Ohio State, I think they're strong enough to run the conference this year, go 9-0 in the Pac-12. Very complete defense. They were top 5 last year defensively, 10 starters back from the unit, and replacing the only vacancy with 2 5-star kids. So, it's built from the trenches out. It's no longer your Chip Kelly gadget Oregon. It's a very, it's strong in the trenches. Mario Cristobal is an offensive line guru, and Joe Moorhead, probably the best coordinator, one of the best coordinators in the country. So that was my 4. I still feel pretty good with Clemson, Ohio State, and Oregon. Now that SEC spot, I mentioned that Florida had a scheduling boost there. That's kind of negated. Now, as we speak here on August 6th, we don't know the SEC's new schedule, but the rumor is that Florida would pick up Bama and Texas A&M, who I have 10th. So what was once an advantage, they actually becomes a disadvantage, drawing both of those powers from the West. And in the interim, since I published the book, JT Daniels got immediate eligibility at Georgia. So they have now not just 1, but 2 Power 5 starting quarterbacks coming in to battle for that quarterback spot. So, I don't want to put it in print, but I'd almost lean back to Georgia for that 4th playoff spot. Now, to listeners out there that haven't bought the book yet, I'll be placing in a couple bonus pages with the new schedules, how any of these predictions may have shaken out, how all of the canceled games would have looked via my game grader formula, Ohio State, Oregon, for example, how the numbers would have saw that. So some cool features coming in. If you bought the book, no worries. I'm going to be emailing that out for free to all the existing customers. So that's one advantage of being digital. It's the paper books that are on newsstands right now, they're locked, they're done. I have the flexibility to connect with my base real quick. So those are my 4. Now, you asked about the national title. Part of that question is, who do I think are the 2 most likely to even make the playoff? And it's a clear cut. It's Clemson. It's Ohio State. Not to go on a tangent, but it's funny. You talk to, I've been on 70 shows. Most of them talk about their rival or other teams within their conference as who the threats are. On the Clemson shows, they're not asking about Florida State or Miami or Louisville or even South Carolina, the rival. They're asking about how's Alabama look, how's Ohio State look. It's like it's their own super conference. So look at Clemson and Ohio State again as number 1, number 2, however you want to shake it out. That'll be the national title. And if it came down to it in January, given all these young starters, 3-4 months of prep and game experience and the revenge factor, I'd have to go Ohio State.
Well, again, you redeem yourself once again. But Brett, thanks for joining the show. For those of you who haven't bought his book yet, I highly recommend it. I was fortunate enough to get a copy of it. Thank you, Brett. And it's really fantastic. It's a great read for any of you college football nerds like myself. Really easy to digest, really well laid out, and digital. You don't have to, I like, you could print it out if you want, but I like being able to bookmark it and reference it and things like that. So if you haven't, definitely go check it out. Check Brett out on Twitter at Pick6, spell out the number 6 at Pick6 Previews. Brett, thanks for joining the show. We really appreciate it, and continue to stay safe and healthy out there.
Yeah, you too, Alex. Thanks for having me. It's been great being on both the Buckeye Scoop shows. And again, for any interested readers out there, type in Buckeyes at checkout for a nice discount too if you're interested. A couple sample pages up there so you can see what we're talking about. And yeah, would love to connect with more Buckeyes on Twitter. So yeah, thanks, Alex, for having me. Stay safe, and hopefully we're talking football in the fall.
This episode of Around the Oval was brought to you by Todd Pennington with Revolution Mortgage. If you've been thinking about refinancing or buying a house, check out our sponsor, Todd Pennington with Revolution Mortgage. They offer low rates for refinancing and home purchase loans, including first-time home buyer programs, down payment assistance, and cash-out home equity loans. Check out revolutionmortgage.com/tpennington.